Grid Systems Engineer Magnus Volkov, Houston Energy Control Center. Classification, Internal Operations Log. The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, but I kept sipping it anyway. Night shifts at the Houston Energy Control Center were usually quiet, a blessing and a curse when you're monitoring the electrical lifeline of 6 million people. The control room hummed with the steady drone of cooling systems and the occasional chirp from monitoring equipment. Everything normal, everything routine, until it wasn't. At 0347 hours, the first anomaly appeared on my primary display. Substation 7 Alpha in the Heights showed a power fluctuation. Nothing dramatic, just a brief spike followed by a dip. I logged it as equipment aging. These substations had been running since the 80s, and even with regular maintenance, they developed quirks. But then 12 Delta flickered, then 3 Charlie, then 18 Bravo. For separate substations across different sectors of the grid, all showing the same pattern within minutes of each other. My fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up diagnostic screens, cross-referencing maintenance schedules, checking weather patterns. No storms, no scheduled work, no obvious cause. Stellan, I called across the control room to my senior analyst. You seeing these fluctuations? Stellan Cross barely looked up from his workstation, his weathered face illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. 20-year veteran of the Houston Grid, Department of Energy liaison, the kind of guy who'd seen every possible failure mode. Which ones? Heights, Montrose, Third Ward, and Galleria sectors, all within the last 10 minutes. Now he turned, his expression mildly interested but not concerned. Transformer harmonics, probably. Summer heat stress catching up with us, even in October. Flag it for the morning crew to inspect. I wanted to agree with him. Stellan knew this system better than anyone. But something about the pattern nagged at me. The fluctuations weren't random. They had a rhythm to them, almost like a heartbeat with an irregular pulse. I pulled up the real-time load distribution map. Houston's electrical nervous system spread across my screen in glowing lines and nodes. The city breathed electricity. Hospitals keeping people alive, refineries processing crude oil, data centers humming with digital life. All of it flowing through the arteries I monitored. The grid's heartbeat felt wrong. Another fluctuation, this time in Pasadena. Then Sugarland. The pattern was spreading, jumping across the metropolitan area with no regard for geographical proximity or electrical pathways. Equipment failures didn't behave like this. They cascaded along connections, followed logical paths of overload and compensation. This was something else. I opened a secure channel to the Texas Interconnection Reliability Council, my fingers hesitating over the keyboard. False alarms were career killers in this business. But so was missing a real threat. Stellan, I think we might have a coordinated issue here. Look at the timestamps. This time he did look, rolling his chair over to peer at my screen. His eyes tracked the data for several seconds before he shrugged. Equipment's getting old, Magnus. Sometimes failures cluster when environmental conditions are right. Houston's grid has been stable for 18 months. We're due for some growing pains. Growing pains. That's what he called it when the power supply to 6 million people showed signs of systematic distress. I checked my personal phone, a text from my brother Daxon, coming off his paramedic shift. Long night. 3 electrical accidents, all weird burns. People saying their appliances bit them. Stay safe at the plant. Electrical feedback injuries from household appliances. During the same time frame as my grid anomalies. The coffee cup trembled slightly in my hand as I set it down. Not from caffeine, from the low-frequency vibration that ran through the control center's foundation. The kind of vibration that came from massive electrical equipment operating outside normal parameters. I looked up at the wall of monitors showing Houston's skyline in the pre-dawn darkness. Millions of lights twinkled like stars, each one representing someone's life, someone's work, someone's safety dependent on the system I was sworn to protect. The grid's heartbeat was definitely wrong. And whatever was causing it, I had a sinking feeling it was just getting started. I began typing my formal incident report, the first entry in what would become the longest week of my life. 0347 hours, multiple substations showing coordinated anomalous behavior. Pattern suggests non-random causation. Recommend immediate diagnostic protocol escalation. M. Volkov, Grid Systems Engineer. I hit send and watched the message disappear into the bureaucratic void. In 6 hours, the morning shift would arrive to a very different Houston than the one they'd left the night before. The question was, Would there still be a Houston left to save? Grid Systems Engineer Magnus Volkov, Houston Energy Control Center. Classification, Priority Incident Log. The morning shift briefing should have been routine. Coffee, donuts, status updates on overnight maintenance, maybe a joke about the Astros' latest losing streak. Instead, I found myself staring at a room full of concerned faces as I explained why half of Houston's suburbs were experiencing rolling blackouts. The anomalies from this morning weren't isolated incidents, I told the assembled engineers and supervisors. We've got systematic load shedding across 17 substations. The automated systems are dropping residential sectors to prevent cascade failures. Jenny Martinez, our day shift supervisor, frowned at her tablet. Load shedding in October? We're nowhere near peak summer demand. That's the problem. The system thinks it's under stress, but our generation capacity is running at 60%. Something's feeding false data to the load management computers. Stellan entered the briefing room carrying a stack of Department of Energy reports, his usual morning ritual. But his eyes looked hollow, like he hadn't slept. Apologies for the delay. Had to coordinate with Austin on the grid stability protocols. Stellan, thank God. Maybe you can make sense of this. I pulled up the real-time grid display on the main screen. Look at this pattern. Substations are going offline in sequence, but not following any logical electrical pathway. He studied the display for a long moment, longer than his usual quick assessments. Have you considered cyber interference? Foreign actors testing our infrastructure resilience. The room went quiet. Cyber warfare against the electrical grid was every engineer's nightmare scenario, but it was also the kind of threat that was supposed to trigger federal response protocols. Clear escalation chains. Military involvement. If this is a cyber attack, shouldn't we be calling? My phone buzzed. Text from Daxon. Bro, something's really wrong out here. We've got burns that don't match any electrical pattern I've seen. Third-degree damage from household outlets. People are scared to touch anything plugged in. I showed Stellan the message. His face went pale. Your brother's a paramedic? He asked. 15 years. He knows electrical injuries. If he's saying these are unusual. Another phone buzzed across the room. Then another. The emergency services band was lighting up. House fires with electrical causes, appliance explosions, transformer boxes arcing in residential neighborhoods. Jenny was already on the phone with Houston Fire Department. Yes, we're aware of the power quality issues. No, this isn't normal equipment failure. I pulled up the diagnostic interface for the affected substations, diving deeper into the system logs than I'd gone that morning. What I found made my blood run cold. Stellan, look at this. The diagnostic systems themselves are compromised. Someone's been inside our monitoring networks, feeding us false readings. The data streams showed normal operations on the surface, but underneath, in the diagnostic layers most technicians never accessed, there were ghost commands. Phantom instructions telling transformers to operate outside safe parameters. Voltage regulators receiving conflicting signals. Protection systems being told to ignore overload conditions. This isn't equipment aging, I whispered. Someone's weaponizing our own grid against us. Stellan leaned over my shoulder, studying the code. Magnus, you need to be very careful about making accusations like that. Grid cybersecurity falls under federal jurisdiction. If you're wrong, if I'm wrong, a few people get upset. If I'm right and we don't act, people die. My phone rang, Daxon calling. Magnus, where are you? Control center. Why? I need you to listen to me very carefully. We just responded to a call in River Oaks. Whole family, electrical burns from their smart home system. The house's electrical system turned against them. Lights, outlets, appliances, everything discharged at once. I could hear sirens in the background, the controlled chaos of an emergency scene. Jesus, Dachon. Are they? 3 critical, 1 DOA. Magnus, I've never seen anything like this. The burn patterns, it's like their own house tried to kill them. I looked around the briefing room. My colleagues were busy with their phones, their computers, their protocols. Normal people doing normal jobs, unaware that someone had turned Houston's electrical grid into a weapon. Daxon, stay away from anything electrical if you can. I think someone's. The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in after 3 seconds that felt like hours, bathing the control room in red light. Every workstation began chiming alarms simultaneously, a sound I'd heard in training simulations, but never in real life. System-wide protection relay activation, Jenny announced, her voice steady despite the chaos. We're looking at coordinated failures across the entire metropolitan grid. I turned to Stellan, expecting to see the same shock and determination I felt. Instead, his face showed something else entirely. Resignation. Like he'd been expecting this. Stellan, what aren't you telling me? He met my eyes, and for a moment, I saw through the weathered exterior to something deeper. Fear. Guilt. And something that looked almost like an apology. Magnus, there are protocols in place for situations like this. Protocols most of us aren't cleared to know about. Sometimes the system has to fail in order to be saved. The alarms kept chiming. On the screens around us, Houston's electrical grid was dying one substation at a time, each failure cascading into the next like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. Someone was inside our system. Someone with clearance, with knowledge, with the ability to orchestrate this destruction. And I was beginning to suspect that someone was sitting right next to me. Outside, 6 million people were about to discover what it meant to live without the electrical lifeline they'd taken for granted their entire lives. The cascade was accelerating, and I was running out of time to stop it. Grid Systems Engineer Magnus Volkov, Houston Energy Control Center. Classification, Security Incident Report. I hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. While the rest of Houston dealt with intermittent power and rising panic, I'd spent the night in the control center's archives, digging through access logs and security records that most engineers never touched. What I found should have been impossible. The sabotage commands weren't coming from outside the system. They were originating from authenticated terminals inside the Houston Energy Control Center itself. Worse, they were being executed with administrative privileges that only 5 people in the entire facility possessed. Including me, including Stellan. I spread the printouts across my desk as the morning shift began filtering in. Each page told the same story. Legitimate user credentials accessing critical system controls during overnight hours when those users weren't supposed to be on site. Commands disguised as routine maintenance procedures, but actually reconfiguring protection systems and overriding safety protocols. You look like hell, Magnus. I spun around to find Stellan approaching with 2 cups of coffee. He looked rested, alert, nothing like the haunted expression he'd worn during yesterday's crisis. Didn't go home last night, I said, accepting the coffee but keeping my eyes on his face. Too much to figure out. And what did you figure out? I slid one of the printouts across the desk. Someone with level 5 administrative access has been modifying our protection algorithms for the past 3 weeks. Small changes, barely noticeable individually, but collectively they've created systematic vulnerabilities across the entire grid. Stellan's expression didn't change as he scanned the document. This could be a lot of things, Magnus. Software glitches, legacy code conflicts. The commands have digital signatures, Stellan. They're not glitches. Someone with legitimate credentials is sabotaging Houston's electrical infrastructure from inside this facility. He set down his coffee cup, and I noticed his hand was completely steady. That's a serious accusation. Have you shared this with security? Not yet. I wanted to understand the scope first. I pulled out another printout. The access logs show the commands originated from Terminal 7 and Terminal 12. Your terminal and mine. Now his expression shifted. Not surprise, calculation. Magnus, you need to be very careful here. If you're suggesting that you or I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Either we've both been compromised, or one of us isn't who they claim to be. My computer chimed with an incoming message. Encrypted, high priority, sender listed as r.martinez_grid_ops. I didn't recognize the username, but the domain was legitimate, Department of Energy Internal Network. I glanced at Stellan before opening it. His eyes were fixed on my screen. Magnus, you don't know me, but I worked grid security for DOE until last month. They terminated me for asking the wrong questions. What you're seeing in Houston isn't random. It's a field test for something called Resilience Protocol. They're going to let your city burn to justify expanding federal emergency powers. Check the backup facility on Telephone Road. Look for Project Firebreak files. Trust no one with DOE clearance. The message disappeared as soon as I finished reading it, leaving no trace in my inbox. What was that? Stellan asked. Spam filter caught something. I closed the email window, but my mind was racing. Riker Martinez. The name was vaguely familiar. I thought I'd seen it on old DOE coordination memos. Stellan, I need to ask you something directly. Are you aware of any Department of Energy operations that might involve deliberately stressing the Houston grid? The silence stretched between us for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, careful. Magnus, there are always contingency plans. Stress tests, resilience assessments, worst-case scenario protocols. It's prudent planning, not malicious action. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you. I stood up, grabbing my jacket. I'm going to drive out to the backup facility. Check some things in person. That's not necessary. I can pull any files you need from here. I'm sure you can. That's exactly why I'm going myself. Stellan's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something underneath that made my blood chill. Not concern for me, or for Houston. Cold professional assessment, like he was calculating variables in an equation. Magnus, sometimes the best way to protect a system is to control how it fails. A managed collapse prevents a catastrophic one. Whose definition of managed? Whose definition of catastrophic? People much smarter than us. People who see the bigger picture. I headed for the door, but his voice stopped me. Be careful what you go looking for. Some knowledge comes with responsibilities you might not want to accept. I turned back. Like the responsibility of watching Houston burn, while pretending it's for the greater good. His face went carefully blank. Drive safely, Magnus. The roads are dangerous when the traffic lights aren't working properly. It wasn't until I was in my car, pulling out of the control center parking lot, that the full implication of his words hit me. The traffic lights weren't working properly because someone was sabotaging the electrical grid. Someone who knew exactly which systems would fail first, and when. Someone who could predict the cascade failures because they were orchestrating them. I thought about Daxon's patients, burned by their own appliances. I thought about the family in River Oaks, electrocuted by their smart home system. I thought about 6 million people whose lives depended on infrastructure that was being deliberately destroyed. The backup facility was 30 minutes away. 30 minutes to find out if Riker Martinez was a whistleblower or a conspiracy theorist. 30 minutes to discover whether my colleague of 5 years was a patriot following orders or a traitor selling out his own city. 30 minutes to decide whether I was going to be complicit in Houston's destruction or die trying to prevent it. The traffic lights I passed were dark, their protective electronics fried by power surges that someone in my own control center had orchestrated. The enemy wasn't foreign. They had badges, clearances, and the keys to every lock that mattered. And they were counting on people like me to follow protocol instead of conscience. Grid Systems Engineer Magnus Volkov, Houston Energy Control Center. Classification: Emergency Operations Log. The backup facility on Telephone Road looked abandoned from the outside. A nondescript concrete building behind a chain-link fence, the kind of structure that blended into Houston's industrial landscape. But the biometric scanner at the entrance recognized my credentials, and the heavy security door clicked open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside, banks of servers hummed in climate-controlled darkness. This was where Houston's electrical grid would be managed from if the main control center ever went offline. The fail-safe that was supposed to keep the lights on when everything else failed. I found the Project Firebreak files in a secured partition that should have required clearance I didn't have. Either Riker Martinez had left me a backdoor, or someone wanted me to find these documents. What I read made me physically sick. Project Firebreak wasn't a stress test or a resilience assessment. It was a systematic plan to cripple Houston's electrical infrastructure in stages, creating escalating blackouts that would justify federal emergency powers under the National Defense Authorization Act. Phase 1, residential sectors. Phase 2, commercial districts. Phase 3, critical infrastructure, hospitals, water treatment, emergency services. We were currently in Phase 2. The plan was clinical in its precision. Projected casualty numbers were listed in neat columns. Acceptable losses, to prevent what the documents called uncontrolled infrastructure collapse. The theory was that a managed blackout would prevent cyber attackers from causing a worse disaster. But there were no cyber attackers. The only threat to Houston's grid was coming from within the Department of Energy itself. My phone buzzed, Daxon calling. Magnus, where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours. I'm following up on something. What's wrong? What's wrong? His voice cracked with exhaustion. Hermann Hospital just went dark. Complete power failure. We're running on backup generators that aren't designed for extended operation. I've got 3 trauma patients who need surgery, and the OR lights keep flickering. I pulled up the grid status on my phone. Hermann Hospital was fed by Substation 15 Delta, which according to my logs was operating normally. But if the hospital was dark... Magnus, are you there? I'm here. Daxon, how many other hospitals are affected? Methodists running on backup power. So is Texas Medical Center. Ben Taub's got partial power, but their equipment keeps surging. It's like the grid is trying to kill our patients. I scrolled through the Firebreak documents until I found Phase 3 protocols. Hospital power systems were specifically targeted because medical facilities would generate the most public pressure for federal intervention. The plan called for degraded but non-critical power delivery to create maximum visibility without immediate mass casualties. Someone was gambling with human lives based on actuarial tables and political calculations. Daxon, I need you to listen to me very carefully. This isn't random equipment failure. Someone is deliberately sabotaging the grid. You need to get your patients to facilities outside the Houston area if possible. Magnus, what are you talking about? Who would? I can't explain right now. Just trust me. Get people out of the medical center if you can. I can't abandon my patients. This is insane. I know it's insane. But people are going to die if... The line went dead. I tried calling back, but the call wouldn't connect. Cell towers were powered by the same grid that was under attack. I copied the Firebreak files to a secure drive and headed back to my car. Houston's skyline was visible in the distance, but something was wrong with the lights. Entire sections of downtown were dark, while other areas flickered like candles in the wind. The radio crackled with emergency reports as I drove back toward the control center. House fires spreading unchecked because fire station backup power had failed. Traffic accidents at intersections where signals were down. Water pressure dropping as pumping stations lost power. Houston was dying, one system at a time, exactly as Project Firebreak had planned. My phone managed to connect to the control center just as I pulled into the parking lot. Magnus, thank God. Jenny's voice was tight with stress. We need you back here immediately. The automated systems are failing faster than we can compensate. Where's Stellan? Conference call with Austin. Federal emergency coordination protocols are being activated. Federal emergency protocols. Just like the Firebreak documents had predicted. I walked into the control center to find chaos. Every workstation was manned, engineers frantically trying to restore power to critical systems. The main display showed Houston's grid like a patient in cardiac arrest, vital signs failing, life support systems struggling, death approaching one subsystem at a time. Magnus. Jenny waved me over. We've lost primary feeds to the entire medical district. I need you to coordinate with the emergency services to prioritize which facilities get generator support. Jenny, what if I told you this wasn't an accident? What if someone was doing this deliberately? She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Magnus, you haven't slept in 36 hours. We're dealing with cascading infrastructure failures, not some conspiracy. Look at the pattern. I pulled up the failure sequence on my workstation. These aren't random cascades. They're following a predetermined script. Someone is orchestrating this. That's impossible. Who would have the access? Someone with DOE clearance. Someone who knows our systems intimately. Someone who's been planning this for months. Jenny's face went pale. You're talking about Stellan. I'm talking about everyone with level 5 clearance who's been feeding us false information while people die in hospitals without power. Stellan chose that moment to walk back into the control room. His eyes immediately found mine, and I saw him assess the situation. The copied files on my desk, the suspicion in Jenny's expression, the way the other engineers had stopped working to listen. Magnus, I understand you've been doing some unauthorized research. I've been doing my job, protecting Houston's electrical infrastructure from threats. All threats. Sometimes the greatest threat is panic. Conspiracy theories. Accusations that undermine operational effectiveness during a crisis. Show them the files, Stellan. Show them Project Firebreak. Show them the planned casualty numbers. The room went silent except for the persistent alarms from failing systems. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward Stellan, waiting for his explanation. Magnus, you're clearly under tremendous stress. These accusations are backed by documentation from your own Department of Energy servers. Stellan's expression shifted from concern to something harder. Magnus, you access classified federal systems without authorization. That's a federal crime. I'm going to have to ask you to step away from your workstation. Like hell. This isn't a request. I looked around the room at my colleagues. People I'd worked with for years, people who trusted me, people who were watching their city die while following orders from someone who might be orchestrating the destruction. Jenny, Firebreak Phase 3 targets hospitals and emergency services. It's designed to create maximum pressure for federal intervention. People are going to die so that politicians can expand emergency powers. Magnus, stop. Stellan's voice carried a warning that made everyone in the room freeze. You're interfering with federal emergency operations. Stand down. Federal emergency operations that you created by sabotaging our grid. I said stand down. I looked at the faces around me. Engineers who had devoted their careers to keeping Houston's lights on. People who had families and neighbors depending on the systems we protected. People who deserved the truth. No. Stellan reached for his phone, but I was faster. I grabbed the secure drive containing the Firebreak files and headed for the exit. Magnus, if you walk out that door, you're not just abandoning your post. You're betraying your country. I stopped at the threshold and turned back. My country is the people of Houston, and right now, you're the one betraying them. The alarms kept screaming as I walked out into the darkness, carrying the only evidence that could expose the conspiracy. Behind me, 6 million people were about to learn what it meant to live without the infrastructure they'd trusted their entire lives. But first, I had to find a way to stop Phase 3 before the hospitals went completely dark. Time was running out, and the enemy had every advantage except one. They didn't know I was no longer willing to follow orders. Grid Systems Engineer Magnus Volkov, secure location. Classification, personal log, federal surveillance probable. I'm transmitting this from the basement of an abandoned electronics store in Montrose, using a portable radio setup that Riker Martinez taught me to build 3 years ago. If you're reading this, it means either I succeeded in exposing Project Firebreak, or I'm dead and someone found my encrypted drives. The federal manhunt started 6 hours ago. Stellan classified me as a domestic terrorist who stole critical infrastructure codes during a national emergency. Every law enforcement agency in Texas is looking for me, while Houston burns in carefully orchestrated darkness. But I'm not the terrorist. I'm the only one trying to stop them. At 2,200 hours yesterday, Phase 3 of Project Firebreak began. The medical district went completely dark, not just backup power failures, but active sabotage of emergency generators. Hermann Hospital's backup system was infected with malware that created power surges, frying critical equipment. Methodist generators were remotely shut down using safety protocols that don't exist in any manual I've ever read. Daxon's ambulance service has been running on fumes and prayers. The last message I received from him was a text that simply said, 21 dead, generators poisoned, grid is the weapon. 21 people. Dead because someone decided their lives were acceptable losses for a political power grab. I've been analyzing the Firebreak documents for 18 hours straight, and the scope is beyond anything I imagined. Houston isn't the only target. Similar operations are planned for Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin. The goal is to create a cascading infrastructure crisis that will justify the National Emergency Infrastructure Protection Act, legislation that would give the federal government direct control over all critical infrastructure in America. Democracy decent darkness. Literally. The most damning evidence is a communication log between DOE Section Chief Aurelian Kane and someone identified only as POTUS 37. The conversation is encrypted, but the timestamps correspond exactly with the grid failures. Kane reports acceptable progress on resilience validation, while people are dying in hospitals without power. They're not just destroying Houston's grid. They're using our city as a proof of concept for nationwide infrastructure warfare. But they made one critical mistake. They trusted Stellan Cross. At 0130 hours, I received an encrypted message on the emergency frequency that Riker had set up. The transmission was brief. Backup facility. Telephone road. Come alone. Stellan had found me. I should have run. Every instinct screamed that it was a trap. But I needed answers, and Stellan was the only person who could provide them. More importantly, he might be the only person positioned to stop Phase 4, the planned collapse of water treatment and natural gas distribution systems. The telephone road facility was dark when I arrived, but Stellan was waiting in the server room. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 2 days. His hands were shaking as he lit a cigarette, the first time I'd ever seen him smoke. Magnus, I need you to understand something. When I signed onto Firebreak, the projections showed minimal casualties. Controlled blackouts, temporary disruptions, rapid federal response. We were supposed to save lives by preventing a real cyber attack. There was no cyber attack, Stellan. You created the crisis you were supposed to prevent. I know that now. He took a long drag, exhaling smoke into the filtered air. Kane lied to everyone. The casualty numbers, the timeline, the exit strategy, all lies. We're not preventing a disaster. We're creating one. So help me stop it. It's too late for that. Kane has executive authorization. Federal marshals are en route to arrest you. The only reason you're not in custody already is because I've been feeding them false locations. Why? Because my daughter lives in Houston. She's 8 years old, Magnus. And she's diabetic. Her insulin needs refrigeration. Without power. He didn't need to finish. I understood. What do you need from me? Kane is flying in tomorrow to personally oversee Phase 4. He'll be at the federal building downtown, coordinating with FEMA to manage the humanitarian crisis. You have a 12-hour window to expose Firebreak before the water treatment plants go offline. How do I get to him? You don't. Kane has a protective detail and federal authority. But there's another way. He handed me a small device that looked like a USB drive. This contains a kill switch for the Firebreak malware. If you can get it to the primary control station at Plant Kogan, you can restore full power to Houston's grid. What about you? I'm going to make sure Kane doesn't leave Houston alive. I stared at him. Stellan, you can't. I can't live with what I've done, Magnus. But I can make sure no other city suffers the same fate. Kane has to die, and I'm the only one who can get close enough. There has to be another way. Look around you. He gestured at the dark city visible through the facility's windows. Houston is dying because I followed orders instead of my conscience. My daughter might die because I trusted the wrong people. How many more children have to die before someone stops this? He was right, but that didn't make it easier to accept. The kill switch will only work if you can maintain physical access to the Plant Kogan control systems for 47 minutes. That's how long it takes to purge the malware and restore automated grid management. Kane's people will try to stop you. What about federal law enforcement? Once the power comes back on, the evidence speaks for itself. Dead hospitals, sabotage generators, the Firebreak documentation, it all points to Kane. The manhunt for you becomes a manhunt for the real terrorists. If it works, Houston lives. If it doesn't, Phase 4 continues and we lose water treatment, natural gas, and emergency services. 6 million people become refugees in their own city. I took the kill switch device. It was warm to the touch, as if it contained something alive. Magnus, I need you to promise me something. When this is over, when the truth comes out, make sure people know that some of us tried to do the right thing. Eventually. I promise. Good. Now get out of here. You have 11 hours and 43 minutes to save Houston. As I left the facility, I heard Stellan making a phone call. His voice was calm, professional, as he reported my location to the federal manhunt team. But he was reporting an address 15 miles away, in the opposite direction from Plant Kogan, buying me time with his own life. The kill switch is active now, connected to my portable radio. If I'm captured or killed before reaching Plant Kogan, this device will transmit the evidence to every emergency frequency in Texas. The truth will survive even if I don't. Houston's skyline is completely dark now except for the glow of fires burning unchecked. The city looks like a war zone, which is exactly what it is. We're at war with our own government, fought with infrastructure instead of bullets. But wars can be won by ordinary people who refuse to follow evil orders. I'm moving toward Plant Kogan now. 47 minutes to restore power to 6 million people. 47 minutes to expose the conspiracy that's killing American cities. 47 minutes to prove that darkness doesn't always win. If you're reading this and I didn't make it, remember, the grid is not just infrastructure. It's the circulatory system of civilization. And right now, our own government is poisoning our blood. Stop them. Save Houston. Save America. The lights are going out all across the nation, but they don't have to stay out forever. Transmission ends. Grid Systems Engineer Magnus Volkov, Plant Kogan Facility. Classification, Final Operational Log. I'm inside Plant Kogan's primary control station. The kill switch is connected. Timer shows 31 minutes remaining until grid restoration is complete. Outside, Houston is a city of the dead. Getting here took 12 hours of moving through an urban wasteland that used to be America's 4th largest city. No traffic lights, no street lamps, No power to the water pumps, so the taps run dry. The air conditioning that makes Houston livable has been dead for 2 days, and the August heat is killing people faster than the infrastructure failures. But it's not the heat that's killing them. It's the silence. Houston is never silent. There's always the hum of air conditioners, the drone of traffic, the distant rumble of refineries. The city breathes with the sound of 6 million people going about their lives. Now there's nothing but the occasional scream echoing through dead streets and the crackle of fires that burn unchecked because the fire department's water pressure failed. I saw things on the way here that will haunt me forever. An elderly woman sitting on her porch, dead from heat exhaustion, still clutching a handheld fan. A convenience store with its security gates torn apart and the shelves stripped bare. A hospital parking lot filled with abandoned ambulances, their crews having fled when the backup generators died and the patients started dying faster than they could be saved. This is what Project Firebreak's acceptable casualties look like in reality. Daxon tried to call me 6 hours ago. I got the message when I reached Plant Kogan and managed to boost the radio signal. His voice was barely recognizable, exhausted, desperate, breaking. Magnus, if you're getting this, I need you to know something. The medical center is gone. Not just the power, the whole complex. Something in the electrical system caused fires that spread faster than we could contain them. We lost Texas Children's Hospital. We lost Hermon. We lost hundreds of people who were depending on us to keep them alive. His breathing was labored. Smoke inhalation, probably. I'm at a field hospital we set up in Memorial Park. We're using car batteries to power medical equipment. Car batteries, Magnus. In America, in 2024. Because our own government decided to use us as test subjects for their infrastructure warfare. Static filled the transmission for several seconds. I found something you need to know. The malware that killed our generators, it's not just affecting Houston. I've been monitoring emergency frequencies. Dallas is reporting similar failures. So is San Antonio. Magnus, they're doing this to the entire state. The transmission cut out after that. I've been trying to reach him for 6 hours. The field hospital frequency is dead. I think my brother is dead. The Plant Kogan facility is a fortress of concrete and steel, designed to withstand hurricanes and terrorist attacks. But it wasn't designed to withstand betrayal from within. The security systems that should have protected it were disabled using federal override codes. The backup power that should have kept it running was sabotaged using the same malware that killed the hospitals. I had to break in like a criminal to access the systems I helped design. The kill switch is working, but it's slower than Stellan predicted. The malware has evolved, adapting to my attempts to purge it. Someone, Kane probably, is actively fighting my restoration efforts from a remote location. Every time I clear one infected system, 2 more show signs of compromise. It's like performing surgery on a patient while someone else keeps stabbing them. But I'm winning. Slowly, painfully, but winning. The eastern substations came back online 40 minutes ago. The medical district has partial power, enough to run essential equipment, but not enough to save everyone who's been dying in the dark. The downtown core is still dead, but the residential areas are getting intermittent power as the grid slowly heals itself. I can see the change from the Plant Kogan observation deck. Houston's skyline is beginning to flicker back to life, one building at a time. Street lights are coming on in patches. The great refinery complexes are beginning to glow again, their safety systems reactivating. Houston is fighting back from the dead. But the cost? The emergency radio is broadcasting casualty reports from across the city. Conservative estimates put the death toll at over 3,000. Heat exhaustion, medical equipment failures, traffic accidents, house fires, carbon monoxide poisoning from people trying to generate power with car engines indoors. 3,000 people dead because a federal bureaucrat decided that Houston's suffering was worth less than his political agenda. I received a final transmission from Stellan 2 hours ago. Brief, encrypted, sent from the federal building downtown. Kane neutralized. Firebreak servers destroyed. You're clear to complete restoration. Tell them the truth. 10 minutes later, emergency frequencies reported an incident at the federal building. Explosion in the executive conference room. 2 dead, including DOE Section Chief Aurelian Kane and grid analyst Stellan Cross. Federal investigators are calling it a tragic accident involving damaged electrical equipment. Stellan kept his promise. He made sure Kane couldn't trigger Phase 4 in any other city. He made sure the conspiracy died with them both. But the price of stopping Firebreak was everything. Stellant's life. Daxon's life. 3,000 innocent people who just wanted to live their lives without becoming pawns in a federal power grab. The timer shows 18 minutes remaining. The grid restoration is entering its final phase, bringing the water treatment plants and emergency services back online. By sunset, Houston will have full power again. The lights will be back on. The air conditioning will be running. The city will begin to heal. But some wounds never heal. I've been thinking about what comes next. The evidence is overwhelming. The Firebreak documents, the communication logs, the forensic analysis of the malware. Kane's conspiracy will be exposed. Heads will roll. Congressional hearings will be held. New policies will be implemented to prevent this from happening again. But 3,000 people will still be dead. And somewhere in Washington, other bureaucrats are probably studying the Houston model and figuring out how to implement it more effectively. How to kill cities without leaving so much evidence. How to destroy infrastructure without creating martyrs. The grid is almost fully restored now. Houston's heart is beating again. But the scars will remain forever, not just in the infrastructure, but in the people who survived. We learned something terrible about our own government these past 3 days. We learned that the people sworn to protect us are willing to sacrifice us for their own power. We learned that the grid isn't just a delivery system for electricity. It's a weapon. And the people who control it don't always have our best interests at heart. The kill switch is complete. Houston's electrical grid is back under local control. The malware has been purged. The sabotage has been stopped. But the war is just beginning. Every city in America depends on infrastructure managed by people who might, at any moment, decide that their citizens are acceptable losses. Every hospital, every school, every home exists at the mercy of bureaucrats who can flip a switch and plunge millions into darkness. Project Firebreak was stopped, but the capability remains. The willingness to sacrifice American cities for political power remains. The infrastructure that makes modern life possible remains vulnerable to attacks from within. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure this never happens again. Not in Houston. Not anywhere. The lights are back on, but the darkness in our government remains. Remember Houston. Remember the 3,000 who died. Remember that the greatest threat to American cities isn't foreign terrorists or cyber criminals. It's the people who swore an oath to protect us. Grid restoration complete. 1,547 hours. Houston electrical system, fully operational. Casualty count, 3,247 confirmed dead. Project Firebreak, terminated. Final transmission ends. Grid Systems Engineer Magnus Volkov, Memorial Park Field Hospital. Classification, personal statement, federal investigation pending. I found Daxon's body at dawn. He was in the ruins of what used to be the Memorial Park Field Hospital, a collection of FEMA tents and emergency shelters that had been set up to treat the overflow from the city's dead hospitals. The tents were still smoldering when I arrived, canvas and medical supplies reduced to ash and twisted metal. Daxon was lying next to an overturned ambulance, his paramedic uniform singed black. He'd been trying to evacuate patients when the electrical fire started. The car batteries they'd been using to power medical equipment had exploded, sending burning acid through the makeshift hospital. He saved 14 people before the flames took him. I counted the bodies. 14 patients who made it out alive because my brother chose to run toward the fire instead of away from it. His radio was still clutched in his hand. The last transmission he'd tried to send was time-stamped at 0347 hours. Magnus, Grid Sabotage confirmed Dallas and San Antonio. Stop them. Stop all of them. Tell Mom I. The message cut off there. I've been sitting next to his body for 3 hours now, watching the sunrise paint Houston's skyline in shades of gold and ash. The city looks almost normal from here. Traffic lights working, buildings powered, the great machinery of urban life grinding back to motion. But I know what's hidden beneath that facade of normalcy. 3,247 people died in 3 days. Not from foreign terrorism or cyber warfare or natural disaster. They died because federal bureaucrats decided that Houston's suffering was an acceptable price for political power. They died because people like me followed orders instead of asking questions. The federal investigation team arrived 2 hours ago. FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and something called the Infrastructure Protection Task Force. They're treating this as a terrorist attack, which I suppose it was. But they're looking for the wrong terrorists. Special Agent Martinez, no relation to Riker, just one of life's cruel coincidences, interviewed me for 47 minutes. Professional, thorough, clearly intelligent. She asked all the right questions about foreign infiltration, cyber warfare capabilities, and domestic extremist networks. She didn't ask about Project Firebreak. When I mentioned Kane's conspiracy, she made a note and told me that unsubstantiated allegations against federal personnel would be handled by a separate investigation. When I offered to provide the encrypted files, she said the FBI would review all evidence through appropriate channels. The same channels that had authorized the murder of my city. I'm not naive. I know how these investigations work. Kane is dead, which makes him a convenient scapegoat. The Firebreak documents will be classified for national security reasons. The other conspirators will be quietly reassigned or retired. And in 6 months, the official report will conclude that Houston was the victim of a sophisticated cyber attack by unnamed foreign actors. The truth will be buried deeper than the bodies. But some truths refuse to stay buried. I've been monitoring emergency frequencies across Texas for the past 12 hours. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. Dallas experienced equipment failures, affecting 40% of their grid. San Antonio had cyber intrusions that disabled hospital backup systems. Austin reported coordinated infrastructure attacks that knocked out water treatment facilities. Project Firebreak wasn't just targeting Houston. It was a statewide beta test for nationwide infrastructure warfare. The casualty numbers are staggering. Over 8,000 dead across 4 cities. Hundreds of thousands displaced. Economic damage in the billions. Also that a handful of federal bureaucrats could justify expanding their power over America's infrastructure. And it worked. This morning, Congress passed the National Emergency Infrastructure Protection Act by a vote of 847 to 12. The bill grants the federal government direct control over all critical infrastructure during national security emergencies. It establishes a permanent federal infrastructure oversight board with the power to override local authorities. It makes Project Firebreak legal. The politicians are calling it a necessary response to the unprecedented terrorist attack on Texas. They're praising the heroic federal response that prevented even greater casualties. They're promising that American cities will never again be vulnerable to infrastructure warfare. They're right about that last part, but not in the way they mean. American cities will never again be vulnerable to infrastructure warfare from foreign enemies because the federal government now has the power to wage that warfare itself. The grid that powers our hospitals, our schools, our homes is now under the direct control of people who have already proven they're willing to sacrifice American lives for political gain. We fought a revolution once to escape tyranny. Now we've voted to bring it back. I think about Stellant's last message. Tell them the truth. But who do I tell? The media is reporting the official story. The investigators are following federal guidelines. The politicians are congratulating themselves on their swift response to terrorism. The public is grateful that the lights are back on. Nobody wants to hear that their own government killed their neighbors. Except the families of the dead. They want answers. They want justice. They want someone to be held accountable for the fact that their loved ones died not from foreign terrorism, but from domestic betrayal. Mrs. Chun from Hermon Hospital lost her husband when the dialysis machines failed. She's been calling my emergency line every hour, asking if I've found evidence of sabotage. I finally told her the truth about Project Firebreak. She listened in silence for 20 minutes, then said, I knew it wasn't an accident. My husband was a systems engineer. He said the power failures were too precise, too targeted. He said it looked like someone was using the grid as a weapon. Her husband was right, and now he's dead for being right. There are others. Families who lost children in the hospital fires. Elderly people who died from heat exhaustion when the air conditioning failed. Emergency responders who died trying to save people from disasters that were deliberately created. They deserve the truth, even if the truth is too terrible for the rest of America to accept. I'm going to give it to them. The encrypted files are still on my secure drives. The communication logs, the casualty projections, the Phase 4 protocols that were never implemented. All of it. Every piece of evidence that proves the federal government murdered American citizens to expand its own power. I'm going to leak everything. Not to the mainstream media. They've already chosen their narrative. Not to the federal investigators. They're part of the system that created this horror. I'm going to take it directly to the people who lost the most. The families of the dead. The survivors who know something was wrong. The local officials who were cut out of the federal response. The engineers and technicians who saw the same patterns I did, but were afraid to speak up. They'll listen. They'll understand. And they'll help me make sure this never happens again. Houston is healing. The grid is stable. The lights are back on. But the scars remain, and the people who created those scars are still in power. Daxon died believing that someone would stop them, that someone would expose the truth and hold the killers accountable. I'm going to make sure he was right. The federal investigation will conclude that Houston was attacked by foreign terrorists. The official history will record a heroic federal response to unprecedented cyber warfare. The politicians will use our tragedy to justify expanding their power over every American city. But the real history will be written by the survivors, by the families who lost everything, by the people who know the truth and refuse to let it die with their loved ones. Project Firebreak has been stopped, but the capability remains. The willingness to sacrifice American cities for political power remains. The infrastructure that makes modern life possible remains under the control of people who have already proven they're willing to use it as a weapon. We can't let this happen again. Not in Houston. Not anywhere. The lights are back on, but the darkness in our government has only grown deeper. Remember the dead. Remember the truth. Remember that the greatest threat to American cities isn't foreign terrorists. It's the people who swore an oath to protect us. Investigation status, ongoing. Federal classification, eyes only. Truth status, pending. Personal log ends. Official silence begins. Grid systems engineer Magnus Volkov, secure location undisclosed. Classification, eyes only, federal investigation pending. Personal statement, recovered evidence log. I never expected to find myself breaking into a federal facility. 23 years of following protocols, respecting chain of command, trusting that the system worked. All of that ended when I buried my brother this morning. Stellan contacted me 3 hours after the funeral. Not through official channels, those were compromised. He used Daxon's old emergency radio, the one my brother had been clutching when he died. The irony wasn't lost on me. Meet me at the old Enron building, he said. Sublevel 3. Come alone. And Magnus, bring everything you've got on Firebreak. The Enron building. Even in death, that company's shadow haunts Houston's infrastructure. How fitting that the truth about our city's murder would be hidden in the corpse of America's most famous corporate fraud. I found Stellan in what used to be the building's network operations center. He looked like he'd aged 10 years and 4 days. His hands were shaking as he powered up a laptop connected to some kind of encrypted satellite uplink. I need to show you something, he said without preamble. The real scope of what they've done. He pulled up a series of classified documents that made my blood freeze. Project Firebreak wasn't just a single operation. It was phase 1 of something called the National Infrastructure Resilience Initiative. A comprehensive plan to systematically test federal control over America's critical infrastructure through controlled failures in selected urban areas. The target list was extensive: Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. But that was just Texas. Phase 2 included Atlanta, Phoenix, Denver, and Seattle. Phase 3 encompassed the entire eastern seaboard. They're not testing for vulnerabilities, Stellan said, his voice barely above a whisper. They're testing for compliance. How quickly can federal agencies assume control? How effectively can they manage information flow? How much damage can they inflict before the public demands answers? The documents were signed by Aurelian Kane, but the authorization went higher. Much higher. Deputy Secretary of Energy. Undersecretary of Homeland Security. Names I recognized from congressional hearings on infrastructure security. They killed my brother, I said. They killed thousands of people, Stellan replied. And they're planning to kill thousands more. He showed me the Phase 4 protocols, the ones that were never implemented in Houston. Complete grid shutdown for 30 days. Martial law. Federal control of all communications, transportation, and emergency services. A beta test for nationwide infrastructure warfare. Why didn't they implement Phase 4? Because Houston fought back, Stellan said. Because engineers like you and your brother refused to let the city die quietly. Because the casualty numbers exceeded acceptable parameters. Acceptable parameters. As if my brother's death was just a data point in some bureaucrat's spreadsheet. There's more, Stellan continued. He pulled up a series of encrypted communications between Kane and someone identified only as Shepard. The messages were brief, clinical. Shepard, Phase 1 exceeds casualty projections by 400%. Recommend immediate termination. Kane, negative. Data collection incomplete. Proceed with modified protocols. Shepard, 8000 plus dead across 4 cities. Media attention increasing. Political risk assessment critical. Kane, acceptable losses for national security objectives. Phase 2 authorization requested. Shepard denied. Project Firebreak suspended pending review. Can, overriding suspension. Congressional authorization secured. Phase 2 proceeds as scheduled. Shepard, Kane, you're killing Americans. Kane, I'm saving America. The last message was timestamped 6 hours ago. Phase 2 proceeds as scheduled. Atlanta goes dark tomorrow night, Stellan said. Unless we stop them. I stared at the documents, trying to process the magnitude of what I was seeing. A federal conspiracy to wage infrastructure warfare against American cities. Thousands of deaths justified as acceptable losses. A plan to use artificial disasters to justify permanent federal control over the systems that keep our civilization functioning. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because I helped them, Stellan said. Because I wrote the protocols they used to kill your brother. Because I thought I was serving my country, and instead I was serving a handful of bureaucrats who see American lives as expendable. He pulled up one final document. His resignation letter, submitted to the Department of Energy 47 minutes ago, along with a complete data dump of all Firebreak-related materials. They'll kill you for this, I said. They'll try, Stellan replied. But I've sent copies to every major news outlet, every congressional oversight committee, and every state attorney general in the country. The truth is already spreading. As if on cue, his satellite uplink chimed with an incoming message. Emergency broadcast from the Department of Energy, classified flash override. All personnel, grid engineer Stellan Cross designated domestic terrorist. Armed and dangerous. Report any contact immediately. Capture alive for interrogation. Secondary alert. Grid engineer Magnus Volkov person of interest. Potential conspiracy involvement. Detained for questioning. They're coming for us, I said. Let them come, Stellan replied. The data's already out there. Every detail of Project Firebreak, every casualty projection, every authorization signature. The families of the dead will have their answers. He handed me an encrypted drive. Everything's on there. The full scope, the Phase 2 target list, the congressional authorization documents. Get it to someone who can't be bought or intimidated. What about you? I'm going to Atlanta, Stellan said. I helped design the protocols they'll use to kill that city. Maybe I can help stop them. The sound of helicopters in the distance. Federal response teams, probably. Moving fast, coordinated, professional. The same efficiency they'd used to murder Houston. They'll never let you get close to Atlanta, I said. I know, Stellan replied. But I have to try. I have to do something to balance the scales. He started packing his equipment. Magnus, I need you to understand something. This isn't over. Project Firebreak was just the beginning. They're testing capabilities, refining techniques, building political support for permanent federal control. Every artificial disaster makes the next one easier to justify. What can I do? Tell the truth, Stellan said. Tell everyone who'll listen. Don't let them bury this with bureaucratic doublespeak and national security classifications. The American people deserve to know that their own government is waging war against American cities. The helicopters were getting closer. Military aircraft from the sound of the rotors. Federal marshals or DoD special operations. People who would shoot first and classify the bodies later. Go, Stellan said. Get that data to the families of the dead. They're the only ones who can't be silenced. I took the drive and headed for the emergency exit. The last thing I saw was Stellan uploading terabytes of classified data to his satellite uplink, broadcasting the truth about Project Firebreak to every corner of the internet. The last thing I heard was the sound of federal agents storming the building. Current status, 2,100 hours. I'm writing this from a secure location. The encrypted drive contains everything: casualty projections, authorization documents, Phase 2 target lists, congressional voting records. The complete blueprint for federal infrastructure warfare against American cities. Stellan was right. The truth is already spreading. Social media reports of massive data leaks from the Department of Energy. Congressional offices flooded with calls demanding investigation. Families of the dead sharing classified documents that prove their loved ones were murdered by their own government. But the federal response is swift and coordinated. Terrorist propaganda, they're calling it. Disinformation designed to undermine public trust in federal emergency response capabilities. Major news outlets are being pressured to suppress the story pending ongoing national security investigations. The same playbook they used to cover up the initial sabotage. Atlanta is still scheduled to go dark in 18 hours. Phase 2 of Project Firebreak will proceed unless someone can stop it. But the infrastructure protection systems are already in place. The federal response teams are already positioned. The political justifications are already prepared. 8,000 Americans died to test these capabilities. How many more will die to perfect them? I think about Daxon's last message: stop them. Stop all of them. The truth is out there now. The families of the dead have their answers. The survivors know who really killed their loved ones. But knowledge isn't justice, and justice isn't prevention. Tomorrow, Atlanta burns, and the day after that, another city, and another, until every American city is under federal control, and the grid that powers our civilization becomes a weapon in the hands of people who see us as expendable. Unless we stop them, the lights are back on in Houston, but the darkness in our government has only grown deeper. Investigation status: compromised. Federal classification: void. Truth status: active. Personal log ends. Federal manhunt begins. Grid systems engineer Magnus Volkov, Georgia Power Emergency Operations Center. Classification: unauthorized access, federal fugitive status. Final emergency broadcast, all frequencies. This is Magnus Volkov, Grid Systems Engineer, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies from the Georgia Power Emergency Operations Center in Atlanta. If you're hearing this, it means I'm either dead or in federal custody. Either way, what I'm about to tell you may be the last chance to prevent another American city from burning. Project Firebreak Phase 2 begins in 47 minutes. I arrived in Atlanta 6 hours ago, using credentials that Stellan provided before the federal agents took him. The city looks peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness, traffic lights cycling through their colors, office buildings humming with electrical life, the great urban machine functioning exactly as it should. In less than an hour, all of that will change. The Georgia Power Emergency Operations Center is a fortress of steel and concrete buried 3 stories beneath downtown Atlanta. It's designed to withstand hurricanes, earthquakes, and terrorist attacks. It's not designed to withstand betrayal from within. I found Aurelian Kane in the primary control room, surrounded by federal agents and DOE technicians. He was standing in front of a wall of monitors showing Atlanta's electrical grid in real time. Every transmission line, every substation, every point of failure mapped out in clinical detail. "Mr. Volkov," he said without turning around, "I was wondering when you'd arrive." "Call it off, Kane," I said. "The truth is already out there. The families know what you did to Houston. Congress is demanding investigations. You can't cover this up." Kane finally turned to face me. He looked tired, older than his years, but his eyes held the cold certainty of a man who believed he was saving the world. "Cover it up," he said. "Magnus, I don't want to cover it up. I want to expand it. Houston was a proof of concept. Atlanta is the production model." He gestured to the monitors. "In 36 minutes, selected portions of Atlanta's electrical grid will experience catastrophic failures. Hospital backup systems will malfunction. Water treatment plants will lose power. Transportation networks will collapse. Emergency services will be overwhelmed. And then federal agents will heroically restore order," I said. "Exactly," Kane replied. "The National Infrastructure Resilience Initiative will be fully operational within hours. Federal control of all critical infrastructure will be justified by the urgent need to prevent further terrorist attacks. American cities will finally be secure." "Secure from what?" "From chaos," Kane said. "From the vulnerability that comes with decentralized control. From the possibility that hostile actors could do to us what we're doing to ourselves." The monitors showed federal response teams positioning themselves throughout Atlanta. Emergency management personnel, DOE technicians, military communications specialists. All of them ready to implement the same protocols that had killed my brother. "You're creating the chaos you claim to be preventing," I said. "I'm creating controlled chaos," Kane corrected. "Manageable disasters that serve a strategic purpose. Better to sacrifice a few thousand lives now than to risk millions later." On the monitors, I could see the preliminary indicators. Power fluctuations in key substations. Diagnostic systems showing false readings. The same patterns I'd watched in Houston, but refined, perfected, optimized for maximum impact. Stellan uploaded everything, I said. The casualty projections, the authorization documents, the Phase 3 target lists. The American people know what you're doing. The American people know what we want them to know, Kane replied. Social media algorithms are already suppressing the leaked documents. Major news outlets are focusing on the ongoing terrorist threat rather than unsubstantiated conspiracy theories. Congressional investigations will be classified for national security reasons. He pulled up a secure terminal and began entering authorization codes. The truth is whatever serves the national interest, Magnus. And the national interest requires federal control of America's infrastructure. 23 minutes until Atlanta goes dark. I looked around the control room. 6 federal agents, 4 DOE technicians, 2 military communications specialists. All of them following orders, trusting their chain of command, believing they were serving their country. Just like I had 4 days ago. How many of your people know what they're really doing? I asked. Need-to-know basis, Kane said. Most of them think this is a terrorism response exercise. The few who know the truth understand the necessity. One of the technicians looked up from her workstation. Sir, we're getting reports of unusual activity on social media. Hashtags about Project Firebreak, Houston grid sabotage, federal conspiracy theories. Should we implement information suppression protocols? Already in motion, Kane replied. Algorithm adjustments, content moderation, strategic account suspensions. The signal-to-noise ratio will be manageable. But I could see the concern in his eyes. The truth was spreading faster than they could contain it. Families of the dead sharing classified documents. Engineers posting technical analyses of the Houston grid failures. Local officials demanding answers about federal response protocols. The American people were waking up. 18 minutes until Atlanta goes dark. It's over, Kane, I said. Even if you succeed here, the truth is already out there. You can't kill everyone who knows. I don't need to kill everyone, Kane replied. I just need to kill enough to make the rest compliant. He turned to the federal agents. Take Mr. Volkov into custody. Charge him with domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit sabotage, and violation of federal emergency protocols. But as the agents moved toward me, alarms began sounding throughout the control room. Emergency broadcasts on all frequencies. Social media feeds showing millions of Americans sharing the leaked Project Firebreak documents. Congressional offices flooded with calls demanding immediate investigation. And something else. Something Kane hadn't anticipated. Sir, one of the technicians said, her voice tight with concern. We're getting reports from power companies across the country. Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin. Their grid engineers are implementing emergency protocols. They're hardening their systems against the attack vectors we've been using. The truth wasn't just spreading. It was being acted upon. Engineers who understood the technical details of the Houston sabotage were protecting their own cities. Local officials who'd been cut out of the federal response were demanding direct control of their infrastructure. Emergency services personnel who'd seen the real casualty numbers were refusing to follow federal protocols. The American people weren't just waking up. They were fighting back. 15 minutes until Atlanta goes dark. Kane's calm facade finally cracked. Override local protocols, he ordered. Implement federal emergency powers. Lock out local control systems. Sir, another technician said, we're getting legal injunctions from state courts. Restraining orders against federal infrastructure takeover. Georgia's governor is threatening to deploy the National Guard. The governor doesn't have the authority. The governor has the backing of 47 other governors, the technician interrupted. They're calling it an illegal federal occupation of state infrastructure. I watched the monitors as Kane's carefully planned operation began to unravel. The federal response teams were being confronted by local authorities. Power company employees were refusing to implement the sabotage protocols. Emergency services personnel were questioning their orders. The conspiracy was collapsing under the weight of its own exposure. But Kane wasn't finished. With shaking hands, he pulled up the final authorization screen. Manual override, he said. Direct federal control of Atlanta's grid systems. Authorization code Bravo 77 Alpha. The screen flashed red. Manual override requires dual authorization, it said. Secondary authorization required. Kane looked around the control room. Stellan, he said quietly. I need Stellan's authorization code. Stellan's in federal custody, one of the agents said. He's not going to. Stellan's dead, Kane said. Shot while resisting arrest. His authorization codes died with him. The room fell silent. Even the federal agents looked uncomfortable. They'd signed up to serve their country, not to execute American citizens for exposing government crimes. 10 minutes until Atlanta goes dark. Without Stellant's authorization codes, Kane couldn't implement the manual override. The automated systems required dual authorization for any action that would affect more than 10% of the grid. A safeguard designed to prevent exactly this kind of sabotage. There has to be another way, Kane said, frantically checking his authorization protocols. Emergency powers, presidential directive, congressional authorization. Mr. Kane, one of the agents said, we're getting a direct order from the Attorney General. All Project Firebreak operations are to cease immediately. You're being placed under arrest for conspiracy to commit domestic terrorism. Kane stared at the monitors, watching his vision of federal infrastructure control crumble in real time. You don't understand, he said. Without centralized control, America's infrastructure is vulnerable. Hostile actors could do to us what we're doing to ourselves. Then we'll be vulnerable, I said. But we'll be vulnerable as free Americans, not as subjects of a federal police state. The agents moved in to arrest Kane. He didn't resist. He just stood there, staring at the monitors, watching Atlanta's grid continue to function normally despite all his efforts to destroy it. This isn't over, he said as they led him away. The vulnerability remains. The next attack will be real. And when American cities start burning for real, you'll wish you'd let me prepare us. Maybe he was right. Maybe decentralized infrastructure control does make us vulnerable to hostile actors. Maybe the next attack will be worse than anything Kane could have imagined. But I'd rather face real enemies with American freedom than artificial enemies with federal tyranny. The sun is rising over Atlanta. The lights are still on. The grid is stable. The city is safe. Not because federal agents protected it, but because the American people protected it themselves. Final broadcast, 0642 hours. Project Firebreak has been terminated. Aurelian Kane is in federal custody. The infrastructure protection systems are being dismantled. The National Infrastructure Resilience Initiative is under congressional investigation. The truth is out. The conspiracy is exposed. The American people have spoken. But the questions remain. How many other projects like Firebreak are hidden in classified budgets? How many other federal agencies see American cities as acceptable testing grounds for their theories of control? How many other brothers and sisters will die before we learn to trust each other more than we trust our government? The lights are on in Atlanta. The lights are on in Houston. The lights are on across America. But the darkness in our government remains. Stay vigilant. Stay free. Stay American. Transmission ends. Federal custody status, escaped. Autre status, permanent. Magnus Volkov, Grid Systems Engineer, American citizen. Final log entry complete. Grid Systems Engineer Magnus Volkov, Memorial Park Cemetery. Classification, unclassified, public record. Final personal statement, Congressional Testimony Archive. 30 days since Houston burned. 30 days since I buried my brother. 30 days since I learned that the greatest threat to American cities isn't foreign terrorists. It's the people who swore an oath to protect us. I'm writing this from Daxon's grave. The headstone is simple. Paramedic Daxon Volkov. He ran toward the fire. Below that, the dates. And below that, the words I had them engrave. Murdered by his own government. The cemetery groundskeeper asked me to change those words. He said they were inappropriate for a military cemetery. I told him they were the only appropriate words for a country that kills its own citizens for political gain. Houston is healing. The official casualty count stands at 3,247 dead, though the real number is probably higher. The families of the dead have been offered federal compensation packages in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements. Most of them have told the government exactly what they can do with their blood money. The cleanup is ongoing. Burned hospitals are being rebuilt. Damaged infrastructure is being replaced. The electrical grid is more robust than it was before the sabotage, with multiple redundancies and local control systems that can't be overridden by federal authorities. We learned from our trauma. We built back better. We made sure it can't happen again. But the scars remain. I testified before Congress 2 weeks ago. The Senate Intelligence Committee wanted to know about Project Firebreak, about the technical details of the sabotage, about the federal conspiracy to wage infrastructure warfare against American cities. I told them everything. The casualty projections that treated American lives as acceptable losses. The authorization documents signed by high-ranking officials. The Phase 2 protocols that would have killed thousands more in Atlanta and beyond. Most of the senators listened with appropriate shock and outrage. They promised investigations, accountability, justice for the victims. They used words like unprecedented and unacceptable and un-American. But some of them asked different questions. Questions about vulnerability assessments and national security implications. Questions about what would have happened if the sabotage had been conducted by foreign actors instead of federal agents. Mr. Volkov, Senator Patterson asked, don't you think this incident proves that we need stronger federal oversight of critical infrastructure? Senator, I replied, this incident proves that federal oversight of critical infrastructure is the threat we need to protect ourselves from. But what if the next attack is real? What if foreign adversaries use these same techniques against American cities? Then we'll face that threat as free Americans, I said, not as subjects of a federal police state that kills its own citizens for practice. The questioning went on for 6 hours. By the end, I realized that some of the senators weren't asking questions to ensure accountability. They were asking questions to understand how the sabotage techniques could be refined, improved, made more effective. The conspiracy may be exposed, but the mindset that created it remains. Aurelian Cain is in federal prison, awaiting trial for domestic terrorism. The Department of Energy has been restructured. The National Infrastructure Resilience Initiative has been officially terminated. Congressional oversight of federal infrastructure programs has been expanded, but the classified budgets still exist. The secret programs still operate. The bureaucrats who believe that American freedom is a luxury we can't afford in a dangerous world are still in power. They've just learned to be more careful. I received a visit last week from a man who claimed to be from the Department of Homeland Security. He said he wanted to discuss ongoing security concerns related to my testimony. He offered me a consulting contract worth more money than I'd make in 10 years as a grid engineer. The only requirement was that I sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement covering all aspects of my involvement with infrastructure security incidents. I told him where he could file his contract. The next day, someone broke into my apartment. Nothing was stolen, but my computer had been accessed, my files copied, my communications monitored. A professional job, no evidence left behind except the message. We know where you live. I'm not scared. I'm angry. Angry that they think they can silence me with bribes or threats. Angry that they believe American citizens are expendable assets in their grand strategic games. Angry that they've learned nothing from the horror they inflicted on Houston. But mostly, I'm angry that they're probably right about one thing. The next attack might be real. The techniques they used to sabotage Houston's grid weren't invented by federal bureaucrats. They were adapted from existing cyber warfare capabilities, refined through studies of foreign attacks on infrastructure, perfected through trial and error on American cities. If they could do this to us, hostile nations could do it too. Maybe they already are. The difference is that when foreign adversaries attack American infrastructure, we fight back. When our own government attacks American infrastructure, we're supposed to say thank you. I think about Stellant's last message. Tell them the truth. The truth is that Project Firebreak was stopped, but the capability remains. The truth is that federal agencies have the technical ability to wage infrastructure warfare against American cities, and some of them believe they have the moral authority to do so. The truth is that the lights are back on in Houston, but the darkness in our government has only grown deeper. The families of the dead have their answers now. They know their loved ones weren't killed by foreign terrorists or cyber criminals or equipment failures. They were killed by American officials who decided that Houston's suffering was an acceptable price for expanding federal power. Some of them have found peace in that knowledge. Others have found rage. All of them have found purpose. Mrs. Chun from Hermann Hospital has started a foundation to monitor federal infrastructure programs. She calls it the Dialysis Machine Memorial Fund, named after the equipment that failed when her husband needed it most. They're tracking classified budgets, FOIA requests, congressional testimonies, anything that might reveal the next Project Firebreak before it kills more Americans. The families of the children who died in the hospital fires have formed a legal advocacy group. They're suing the federal government for wrongful death, demanding that the officials who authorized the sabotage be held personally accountable for murder. The emergency responders who lost colleagues in the artificial disasters have created a whistleblower network. They're monitoring federal emergency response exercises, looking for patterns that might indicate preparation for deliberate infrastructure attacks. They're not waiting for the government to investigate itself. They're doing the investigation themselves. I've joined them. We call ourselves the Grid Watchers, engineers, technicians, and emergency responders who know what infrastructure warfare looks like and refuse to let it happen again. We monitor power grids across the country, looking for the telltale signs of deliberate sabotage. We track federal infrastructure programs, mapping the capabilities and authorities that could be used against American cities. We maintain secure communications with local officials who've been cut out of federal emergency planning. We're not conspiracy theorists. We're Americans who learned the hard way that the greatest conspiracies are conducted by people with badges and clearances and the unshakable belief that they know what's best for the rest of us. The lights are on in Houston. The lights are on in Atlanta. The lights are on across America. But we're watching the switches because we know who's really in control of them. And we know what they're willing to do to keep that control. Daxon died believing that someone would stop them. He was right. We stopped them in Houston. We stopped them in Atlanta. We stopped Project Firebreak before it could spread to other cities. But stopping one conspiracy doesn't prevent the next one. Exposing one program doesn't eliminate the mindset that created it. The only way to prevent the next Project Firebreak is to make sure the American people never again trust their government more than they trust each other. The grid that powers our hospitals, our schools, our homes is too important to be controlled by people who see us as expendable. The infrastructure that makes modern life possible is too critical to be managed by bureaucrats who believe that American freedom is a luxury we can't afford. We built this country on the principle that governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. Project Firebreak was an attempt to reverse that principle, to make the governed derive their safety from the consent of the government. It failed, but the temptation remains. So we watch, we wait, we prepare, and we remember. We remember that the greatest threat to American cities isn't foreign terrorists. It's the people who swore an oath to protect us. Final entry, 1,247 hours. The sun is setting over Houston. The city lights are coming on, one by one, as the great urban machine prepares for another night of electrical life. From here, you can see the skyline stretching toward the horizon. Hospitals and schools and homes, all of them powered by the grid that was once used as a weapon against the people it was supposed to serve. But tonight, the lights are on for the right reasons. Not because federal agents allow them to be on, but because the American people refuse to let them be turned off. The investigation continues. The families of the dead demand justice. The grid watchers maintain their vigilance. And somewhere in a classified budget, buried in a federal agency that most Americans have never heard of, the next Project Firebreak is probably being planned. But we'll be ready for it, because we remember the dead. We remember the truth. We remember that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, not just against foreign enemies, but against domestic ones who wear the flag while betraying everything it stands for. The lights are on in Houston, and we're watching the switches. Investigation status, ongoing. Federal classification, declassified. Patrouille status, permanent. Magnus Volkov, Grid Systems Engineer. Grid Watcher, Houston Chapter. American Citizen. Memorial Park Cemetery, Houston, Texas. Day 30, system restored, vigilance maintained. Transmission ends.